Before we move to First Minister's question time, I invite members to join me in welcoming to the gallery the Honourable Todd Gowdy, MLA, Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. I call Russell Finlay at question number 1.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Sue Rawlinson's beloved husband of 33 years went out to work as a bus driver but never came home. Keith Rawlinson was violently attacked by a teenage thug and died in hospital. As he lay dying, Sue and her daughters were told not to touch him. She told me, "We weren't even allowed to hold his hand because the police said that it might contaminate the evidence." The killer was sentenced to 4 years and 4 months. He was not sent to prison, but instead to charity-run accommodation with a swimming pool and courtyard garden. He has not spent a single night in prison. He killed an innocent man 2 years ago, but he could be freed and back home within weeks. Does John Swinney think that's justice?
First Minister.
President Officer, before I come on to the important point that Mr Finlay has raised with me, I would like to record my sadness at the death of Jean Freeman, who was one of my Cabinet colleagues as the Health Secretary, who served this Parliament and this country with distinction through many difficult and challenging moments in the COVID pandemic, but also contributed to enhancing Scotland with the design of our social security system. And I express my sympathies and those of the Government to her partner Susan and her friends and family on the loss of a magnificent woman taken from us all too suddenly and all too early in her life. In relation to, first of all, I want to express to Russell Finlay my understanding and appreciation of the depth of concern that he raises with me on behalf of Sue Rawlinson. I know that Mr Finlay met with the Justice Secretary and with Richard Lochhead, Mr Rawlinson's local Member of Parliament, earlier on in this week, and I understand the concern that has been expressed. Obviously, the decisions that what happened to Mr Rawlinson was absolutely and completely unforgivable and unspeakable. And the courts considered this issue and have taken the decisions that they have taken. There will be a parole hearing in this case. A parole hearing was held on this case on the 11th of February, and a decision was postponed to a future oral hearing. And the parole board is responsible for considering the issues about the length of sentence or how much time is spent within that sentence as part of their responsibilities.
Russell Finlay.
Well, John Swinney can't say it, so I'll say it for him. A violent killer not spending a single night in prison and who could be back home after 2 years is not justice. It's sickening, and it's an affront to Sue Rawlinson and her family. This killer was given a shockingly short sentence because of guidelines introduced by an SNP Quango. Judges are told not to jail criminals aged up to 25 or to impose lighter sentences. These guidelines traumatise victims by treating murderers and rapists as if they are children. And this is all based on the nonsense belief that they are not mature enough to be responsible for their crimes. They are one of the many ways in which the SNP government has spent years weakening Scotland's justice system. For the sake of victims like Keith Rawlinson, will John Swinney do the right thing and finally scrap these disgraceful guidelines?
First Minister.
President Officer, as Mr Finlay correctly says, the information and the guidance on sentencing comes from the Independent Sentencing Council, which takes a considered view about all of these questions, and they do that at arm's length from ministers. Now, the Young Person Sentencing Guidelines makes it clear that all sentencing options, including imprisonment, remain open to the court. And it's really important that I put that point on the record, because it is just not the case that these sentencing guidelines make the provisions that Mr Finlay has talked about. The sentencing guidelines make it clear that imprisonment remains open to the court. Now, these decisions on sentences are taken by the independent judiciary, and I think it's an important principle of our judicial system that the judiciary are able to operate independent of government with the ability to exercise, as I set out, the full range of options, including imprisonment, that are open to the judiciary on such cases.
Russell Finlay.
My description of the SNP sentencing guidelines was 100% accurate. Yeah. Keith Rawlinson's killer previously attacked another bus driver, yet he was still allowed, after that, to keep his free bus pass. Our party has been campaigning for years to deny free travel from those who commit crimes and antisocial behaviour on the buses. John Swinney agreed to make this happen in May last year, but 9 months on, and it still hasn't happened because the SNP government has botched the legislation. Jim Fairley's shaking his head. He botched the legislation. Sue Rawlinson is rightly furious that her husband's killer will still be entitled to a free bus pass when he gets out. Can John Swinney guarantee that this killer will have his bus pass removed and say exactly when this will happen?
First Minister.
The draft code, which will enable the decisions that Mr Finlay has talked about, will be put to was shared with the Parliamentary Committee that will scrutinise these issues on the 28th of January, and the statutory instrument is due to be debated at the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee next Tuesday, the 17th of February. So the steps to take forward the programme for government commitment that I made to remove free bus travel from any person of any age who does not act responsibly will be put to committee on the 17th of February, and I would encourage the committee to... The committee is obviously free to take its own decisions, but I would encourage it to take that decision to put this into practice. And obviously, as I said in my first answer, the question of whether the individual who was convicted of the crime in relation to Mr Rawlinson will have his parole hearing determined at a future hearing of the parole board, and I therefore cannot give a definitive answer to the question of timescale because I don't know at what decision the parole board will take.
Russell Finlay.
Attempting to decipher all that, it does sound like this killer may well still have his free bus pass despite killing a bus driver. Exactly. And Keith Rawlinson's tragic case highlights so much that's wrong with the SNP's weak justice approach. A law that keeps some killers out of prison, guidelines that ensure other serious criminals are not jailed, releasing thousands of criminals early. No wonder Angela Constance got back to me. There's so much more, and none of this is by accident, it's by design. And now John Swinney is going to free some prisoners after serving just 30% of their sentences. The SNP, stronger for criminals. Now, the last word today goes to Sue Rawlinson. I told Sue that Keith would be proud of her, and she said to me, Keith will be looking down and saying, "Oh my goodness, Sue, where did you get that strength from?" Well, Mr Swinney, she gets her strength from her love of Keith and from the suffering she has endured at the hands of the SNP justice system. Does John Swinney have any understanding of the pain and the anguish that his government is inflicting on good and decent people across Scotland?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I have every sympathy for Mrs Rawlinson and what she has endured, and she and her husband should never have had to experience the awfulness of what they have experienced. And I can only express my sympathy to her, and I can also set out what is happening in relation to criminal justice in Scotland today. So recorded crime under this government is down 38% since 2006-07. At the same time, people are being sentenced for invariably longer periods of time in prison as a consequence of the success of the government. As a consequence of the success of the government in
Let's
taking
hear
forward,
one another.
As a consequence of the success of the government in taking forward, through the Crown, the prosecution of many crimes that were previously unaddressed, and individuals are now spending longer, on average, in prison as a consequence of the decisions that this government takes. Well, the average length of custodial sentences for weapons possession, for example, has increased by 52% between 2007-2008 and 2022-23. So I have every sympathy with Mrs Rawlinson for what she has experienced, and I want to assure her that this government is doing everything it can to make sure that those who commit crimes will be apprehended, prosecuted, and where the courts decide to do so, they will be imprisoned as well.
We move to question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by echoing John Swinney's comments about Jean Freeman, and we send our love and condolences to Susan and all her family, friends and colleagues. As I said in this chamber yesterday, I will forever be thankful, as will the families and doctors at the Queen Elizabeth, because Jean Freeman was willing to listen, she was willing to learn, and she was willing to act. And we thank her for her service to our country and also to our NHS. For weeks, John Swinney has denied political pressure was applied to open the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital before it was ready. But on March 29, 2015, John Swinney told SNP Conference, weeks before an election, that in relation to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, that, and I quote, "with the SNP government on time and on budget is the rule, not the exception." Weeks later, this independent report was received that stated the Children's Hospital was not safe, that there was high risks of infections and therefore high risk to life for immunocompromised patients. That report was ignored and the hospital opened anyway. Children died as a result. So will he now finally take responsibility and apologise to the families?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the issues that Mr Sarwar raises are part and parcel of the independent public inquiry that has been taken forward by Lord Brodie. As Mr Sarwar knows full well, the Government first became aware of the issues in relation to the water contamination system in 2018. That information is all in front of the inquiry, and it is for Lord Brodie to consider these issues as part of the independent inquiry. The Government established that independent inquiry to undertake that process, and we shall leave Lord Brodie to do exactly that.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, he is denying reality and continuing to mislead this Parliament. So let's look at the evidence. Despite John Swinney's denials, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde said pressure was applied to open the hospital on time and on budget, and it's now clear that the hospital opened too early. This Scottish Government meeting note states explicitly political pressure was also being felt and no consideration was given to delay the opening of the hospital despite the issues being faced with completion and operation. And weeks before the hospital was opened, John Swinney told his party conference in relation to this hospital that with the SNP government, on time and on budget is the rule, not the exception. Clear political pressure. Families are hurting enough. So why is John Swinney insulting their intelligence and exacerbating their pain?
First Minister.
So, a few weeks ago, Anna Sarwar came here and he brandished his supposedly secret document about political pressure being applied to the opening of the hospital. The document was not in any way secret because it had been submitted to the independent public inquiry by the government. Now, Mr Sarwar comes here and his big reveal today is the contents of a conference speech that I gave in front of thousands and thousands of people, which was broadcast on live television. So I don't quite understand what is the sensational point.
Let's hear one another.
I don't quite understand what the sensational point that Mr Sarwar is trying to put forward. It smacks of desperation in the arguments that Mr Sarwar is putting forward. We have established an independent public inquiry which we will leave to make its judgments about this whole issue so that the families involved can get the truth, which is what they deserve to get.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, John Swinney forgets that the families are watching him and listening to his answers. And let's look at what the families are having to hear and endure. Not just the pain of losing a loved one, but that politics was put before patient safety and pressure was applied to open the hospital. That the hospital opened before it was safe and ready. That a report warned of the risk of infections, but it was ignored. That the Scottish Government received 14 alerts of infections, but it didn't take the appropriate action. That even now, the hospital has not been validated. And just yesterday, the SNP tried to block information around current safety at the hospital. And to add even more insult, that a Scottish Government official attempted to bribe grieving families with cash and a trip to Disneyland, rather than confront the truth. So what does he say to these families who are having to go through this hell because of his government's decisions?
First Minister.
What I would say to the families is that this government has done two things of significance in this area. The first is that the government has established an independent public inquiry, which we respect. We respect its independence. We will not tolerate political interference in the inquiry, as Mr Sarwar has tried to do. We won't play the politics with the inquiry. We won't interfere with it. We'll allow Lord Brodie to undertake his steps. And then the second thing that the government has done is where we become aware of issues of concern, we act. And we did that in relation to the Edinburgh Sick Children's Hospital, where we acted, intervened to stop its opening because we were aware of information. And Mr Sarwar knows full well that the government was not aware of the information that he puts to me. Now, the last point I want to make, Presiding Officer, is that Mr Sarwar has made many comments about the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. And I think it's important that I put on the record the important points about the safety of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, because that is a hospital used by thousands and thousands of people every single day. The independent inquiry heard from the independent expert Andrew Poplett that the water system management is now, and I quote, extremely well managed, close quotes, with, and I quote again, significant improvements made. Mr Poplett noted that the facilities team is exceeding standard guidance, adopting a proactive and preventative approach that prioritises patient safety. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde recently commissioned and has now received 2 independent reports on their water and ventilation systems to provide further assurances. The findings of these independent reports were both positive, with a fully compliant ventilation assessment in December 2025 and a fully compliant water system assessment in January 2026. These reports will be considered by the Safety and Public Confidence Oversight Group, announced recently by the Cabinet Secretary, which was welcomed by the Labour Party in its motion yesterday. Now, my advice to Mr Sarwar, in his absolute desperation, is to stop playing politics with this issue, respect the independent inquiry, as this government will do, and allow the families to get to the truth of what has happened. That's what we're committed to, not the desperate acts of Anna Sarwar.
Question number 3, Ross Greer.
Thank you. Can I echo the First Minister's tribute to Jean Freeman and send my love and that of my party to our friend Susan? Nothing the Prime Minister or others can say now changes the fundamentals of the scandal rightly engulfing them. Peter Mandelson was lauded, given huge influence and ultimately one of the most important jobs in the British Government, despite it having been public knowledge for years that he had remained friends with Epstein after he was convicted for child sex offences. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor clearly felt that he was above the law, and so far he's been
Let us hear one another.
So far he's been proven correct. The late Queen and current King put up millions of pounds to make his problems go away. But the problems were real people, real women and girls who suffered their abuse. The victims and survivors are in danger of being forgotten, erased by the political fallout. That cannot be allowed to happen. Men's violence against women and girls isn't just an elite problem, it's endemic at every level of our society, and every man has a role in solving it. So can I ask the First Minister what his message is to women and girls in Scotland who have survived and continue to endure men's violence?
First Minister.
President Officer, I agree with Mr Greer that the suffering of women and girls in the case of Jeffrey Epstein is of the highest level of concern, and I'm struck that all of those concerns were bypassed by the Prime Minister in his appointment of Peter Mandelson as the United Kingdom's ambassador to the United States, and it is jaw-dropping that that was the decision taken. In relation to the responsibilities that I hold here, Presiding Officer, I've made it clear from this podium on a number of occasions, and I take the actions within Government along with my Cabinet colleagues to make sure that we take strenuous efforts to tackle the issues of violence against women and girls in our society through a range of measures, including the equally safe measures that we take forward, and also to ensure that we set out the fundamental point that the issue at the heart of violence against women and girls is the behaviour of men, and men's behaviour has got to change.
Ross Greer.
I agree absolutely with the First Minister that the issue here is men's behaviour and men's violence. Tackling that violence against women and girls means changing underlying attitudes. The uncomfortable truth is that far too many men and boys just do not see women and girls as equal or worthy of respect and dignity. Here in Scotland, many boys and young men leave school having been taught nothing about the importance of consent and respect in relationships. Over the last few years, I've worked with the
Let's hear one another.
I have to say, Presiding Officer...
First, Mr Greer, very conscious that the galleries are full. People would like to be able to follow our proceedings. Ross Greer.
Thank you. I have to say, Presiding Officer, I'm surprised to hear the Conservatives interrupt on this of all topics. Over the last few years, I've worked with the Education Secretary to update guidance for relationships education. It's frankly unbelievable that the current guidance, which is only from 2014, has no section on consent. The new guidance that we developed was published last week, though, and it starts with a chapter on the importance of consent. If we are to break the generational cycle of misogyny and men's violence against women and girls, that guidance needs put into use in every school. So does the First Minister agree that every young person in Scotland, especially every young man, should be taught about the importance of consent and respect in relationships before they leave school?
First Minister.
President Officer, whatever the parliamentary mood on this question, I want to make it clear that I attach the greatest of importance to this issue and to the representations that Mr Greer has made to me over the years on this question, and I pay tribute to the way in which he has pursued this issue in the face of parliamentary resistance, I might add, some of which we've heard about today as well. Now, the Relationships, Sexual Health and Parenthood Education programme aims to equip young people with knowledge and understanding of issues such as consent, appropriate relationships and boundaries to help them make informed choices that promote and protect their own and others' health and well-being. And I thank Mr Greer for his contribution to enabling that to be the case. I believe that should be in place across our education system. It is an essential part of equipping young people, and particularly young boys, with all of the information that they require to be able to undertake responsible lives, and for us all together to take the action that's necessary to ensure that violence against women and girls is consigned to the dustbin of history in our country.
Question number 4, Michelle Thompson.
To ask the First Minister how often he or the Scottish ministers engages with the Scottish Government's Washington DC International Office regarding the Scottish whisky industry and other economic interests in the United States.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government interacts closely and regularly with its Washington office on the important work to promote Scotland's cultural, social and economic interests, including support for the whisky sector, which contributes £5.4 billion to our economy. As Michelle Thompson will know, I have been active in trying to secure the removal of the tariffs on Scotch whisky. We continue to await progress from the UK Government in prioritising Scotch whisky in negotiations and securing the tariff exemptions that the sector deserves. Our Washington office will remain central to ensuring this, and our wider economic interests stay high on the agenda.
Michelle Thompson.
I thank the First Minister for that reply and setting out the value of representing Scotland on the global stage. Now, given the chaos in Westminster whilst the Labour Party tears itself apart, I'm concerned at the price Scottish industries are having to pay. UK Labour's tax on Scottish whisky and energy is destroying jobs and hammering our economy. Does the First Minister agree that the Labour Party cannot be trusted to put Scottish economic interests first? And can he say more about how his government is working to protect Scotland's premier industries?
On devolved matters.
Well, Presiding Officer, I think Michelle Thompson hits the nail on the head, to be honest, that while now that we know from Anas Sarwar that the Labour government is absolutely useless in the United Kingdom and that the Prime Minister should leave office, there will be little attention being paid to the central issues that affect our economic well-being, principally on the tariffs issue in relation to whisky. So, while this government in Scotland will always act to champion and take forward the interests of Scotland, we're undermined by a useless Labour government in London that Anas Sarwar encouraged everybody to support. It shows quite clearly what poor judgment Anas Sarwar has got.
Question number 5, Rachel Hamilton.
To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government will provide an update on the service delivery review of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service will determine how its resources should best be deployed to adapt to the changing risks to keep our communities safe and to remain effective and efficient, and ensuring that we have the resources in the right place at the right time. Last summer, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service carried out a public consultation on its strategic review, and a large number of responses are being independently analysed. The Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Board will then decide which of the options should go forward for implementation over the next 5 years.
Rachel Hamilton.
I thank the First Minister for that answer, but the review has now been shamefully delayed until after the elections in May, which is unacceptable for my constituents in Hawick, who deserve to know about the future of their local station. Presiding Officer, the SFRS warned that 500 firefighters could be cut over the next 3 years, and this is stark because it follows warnings that the number of firefighters falling by nearly 1,200 over the last 12 years in Scotland, there could be an added removal of 166 firefighter posts in that review. So, will the First Minister shoulder the responsibility of the hollowing out of the fire service if, God forbid, something catastrophic happens in the areas where these cuts are happening?
First Minister.
President Officer, I think it's very important that we have in all parts of the country an effective and an efficient fire and rescue service. But as members will understand, there will be tremendous challenges in allocating resources that are appropriate for the conditions and the circumstances that we face. Now, as one practical example, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service has got to wrestle with the fact that our climate is changing and there are significant new demands in relation to questions such as wildfire, but then also in relation to flooding. These are two very substantial issues which can affect all parts of the country. So we have to ensure that we have the resources in the right place, which is the purpose of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Strategic Review. And the SFRS will engage on all of these questions. Parliament will, of course, be able to interact on all of these questions. But I give the assurance that we need to have in place an effective Scottish Fire and Rescue Service in Scotland, and I believe we do so.
Sarah Boyack.
Is the First Minister aware of the concerns of local communities about the impact of the Marianville Fire Station being closed without a local replacement, and given the strong cross-party support to deliver a station that will meet the needs of our growing communities in the area? So will he step in to support our call for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to save Marianville Station?
First Minister.
I am familiar with the issues around Marianville. It's been raised a number of times by members of Parliament, and I've sought information and advice about these questions. It is part of that dilemma that I talked about in my answer to Rachel Hamilton, where we have to make careful judgments about the placement of resources, and there will, of course, be changes to population spread. There is very substantial expansion of population in the east of Scotland, particularly in the east of the city of Edinburgh and into East Lothian. So all of these issues will be part of the detailed consideration that is undertaken by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and I know that the issues that Sarah Boyack raises will be part of that consideration.
Question number 6, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that police stations across Lanarkshire, including in Bells Hill, will be closed permanently to the public or have their hours reduced from the 1st of April.
First Minister.
President Officer, decisions on the management and use of the police estate lie with the Chief Constable, but I recognise that people in the Lanarkshire area will have concerns about the plans that Mr Griffin has raised with me. I can confirm that police officers will remain embedded in communities across Lanarkshire, and community policing continues to be a priority for Police Scotland in all of these areas. Mark Griffin.
Bells Hill Police Station, along with stations across Lanarkshire, will close to members of the public on the 1st of April, with the authorities saying that it's to free up officers from being behind a desk. But, Presiding Officer, they were only behind the desk because the SNP government slashed Police Scotland's budget and forced the redundancies of thousands of support staff who did an excellent job and at a lower cost. What does the First Minister say to the people of Bells Hill who need physical access to a police station to safely report a crime, particularly women at risk of domestic abuse who can't afford to leave an electronic trail behind?
First Minister.
President Officer, one of the issues that's been raised with me about the situation at Bells Hill is that the decision was arrived at by Police Scotland because of the lower level of footfall which was presenting at the Bells Hill Police Station. I think there will be operational decisions that Police Scotland have to make in relation to facilities that are not being used as frequently as they might have in the past. In relation to his question about the reporting of crimes, there are many different ways in which crimes can be reported, and there is a protection available to ensure that women reporting crimes of violence are able to be protected by the systems and initiatives that are in place. And I certainly will encourage Police Scotland to make sure there is wider awareness about all of these different issues and different routes to report a crime.
Question number 7, Jamie Green.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government will make further changes to the draft budget 2026-27 published in January in relation to business rates, hospices and the care sector.
First Minister.
President Officer, the areas raised by Jamie Green are ones which the Finance Secretary has been working on, and I want to thank Mr Green for his constructive engagement in the budget process. On hospices, I can confirm that an additional £2.9 million will be provided to ensure hospices can maintain parity for their staff with NHS Agenda for Change. On social care, an additional £20 million will be provided to local government for social care, which they can use towards matters such as funding the real living wage for adult and childcare services. And on business rates, the Finance Secretary will outline details later today that will see licensed premises and music venues liable for the basic and intermediate property rates see their relief increase to 40%, subject to the £110,000 cap per business in Scotland.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the First Minister for that? I welcomed in the draft budget our calls for more funding for colleges, for young entrepreneurs, for autism assessments and, of course, for our islands. But I did also make it clear that we needed to see more for hospices, for care providers, for hospitality and self-catering, all crying out for more support. It sounds like today we've made some progress for social care, for hospices and on business rates. My calculation puts that as just shy of £300 million for Liberal Democrat priorities. Why? Because we chose to negotiate properly and get things done. So we will support the budget this afternoon. Can I ask the First Minister to spell out the difference that the Liberal Democrats have made to this year's budget?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, First of all, Presiding Officer, let me welcome the commitment that Mr Green has given on behalf of the Liberal Democrats to support the Government's budget this afternoon. That is indeed welcome. It is a product of constructive engagement to serve the people constructive engagement to serve the people that sent us here. And that's what this is all about Parliament engaging where the Government does not have a majority, so we need to work with others to get the budget through. And what we've experienced this year is constructive collaboration with some political parties to advance on the issue. I'm sure the people of Scotland will notice that. I welcome the support the Liberal Democrats will give us this afternoon for the budget. And let me make it clear that a government under my leadership will always work to serve the people of Scotland, addressing their priorities and meeting the needs of the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sorry to encroach on the love-in between the Lib Dems and the Nationalists, but as a result of the SNP's brutal business rates regime, many of Scotland's pubs are calling last orders for the final time. But as Innocent Gunn warned yesterday, those pubs that survive are reluctantly being forced to hike prices to eye-watering levels. So is John Swinney happy to be remembered as the First Minister who forced hard-working Scots to pay £10 a pint?
First Minister.
If Mr Hoy knew anything about the way in which taxation operates in the United Kingdom, he would know that the amount alcohol taxation is a reserved tax which is determined by the United Kingdom Government, and countless Labour and Tory governments have made it more and more difficult for the spirits and beer industry in this country to survive because of their stupid decisions on alcohol taxation. So let me just say to Mr Hoy,
let's hear one another.
Let me just say to Mr Hoy, who has contributed the square root of absolutely nothing to the budget process, that the Scottish Government is managing to navigate its budget through Parliament without a majority and, thankfully, without contaminating ourselves with the destructive force of the Conservative Party.
Thank you. In the time we have left, concise questions will enable more members an opportunity. I call Marie McNair, Constituency and General Supplementaries.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Titan crane is a beacon to the industrial heritage of Clydebank and shipbuilding on the Clyde. It survived 2 world wars, including the Clydebank Blitz. In 2007, after maintenance work and creation of a visitor centre, the crane was open to the public, a memory of our industrial past, one that helped make Clydebank world-renowned and the backbone of Scotland's shipbuilding industry. Unfortunately, Labour Council failed to maintain the crane, and it now remains closed to the public and left to rust. Will the First Minister join me on a visit to the Titan crane to see for itself its significance and potential, and will he commit to the Scottish Government doing everything possible with others to see the reopening and making a massive contribution to the tourist industry in Scotland?
First Minister.
I'm very familiar with the Titan crane. I've been up the Titan crane. It's an incredible landmark which recognises the industrial heritage of the Clydebank area and of such significance in Scotland's story, and it's also a magnificent facility. Obviously, The duty of care falls on the local authority, Western Bartonshire Council, and I would encourage Western Bartonshire Council to provide adequate care and maintenance for the site. And obviously, the Government will engage constructively in every way that we can to try to make sure that the crane can be accessed by members of the public. And I thank Marie McNair for raising an important issue about the significance of this of the Titan crane in the industrial landscape of Scotland.
Tim Eagle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister may be aware of the news that Orbex are sent to enter administration, putting at risk over 150 skilled jobs, very high-skilled jobs in Forres. It is a devastating blow to Murray, but also to the UK's wider space ambitions. We all, I believe, want to stop further rural depopulation. So can I ask, will the Scottish Government seek to engage with Orbex, and what support can be offered to the residents and the staff who will be deeply worried?
First Minister.
I am familiar with the news. I had the pleasure of visiting Orbex, and it's an incredibly innovative and creative and inventive organisation. It faces uncertainty given the decisions that have been announced, and my colleague Richard Lockhead, the Business Minister, is meeting with the company and the administrators today, and the Deputy First Minister has been closely engaged with the interim administrators, with Highlands and Islands Enterprise and the United Kingdom Government to further understand the steps that can be taken to safeguard the opportunities at Orbex. I am very clear that this is a significant issue because the space sector has real potential for Scotland, and therefore the economic benefits are significant, and the Government will do all that we can to try to support the development of a secure future for Orbex, because there is significant leading technology being developed there, and we will do all that we can to try to help to protect it for the future.
Keith Brown.
The First Minister, like me, will have received correspondence, I'm sure, from a number of constituents who are former Scottish public servants who cannot access information about their pension, sometimes can't even access their pension at all once they're entitled to it. You may have seen a lady from elsewhere in the UK this morning who has cancer, who has 6 months to live, that's having to borrow to pay her bills because she cannot get her pension. This arises from the outsourcing of the pension management to Capita, a terrible record in terms of armed forces recruitment previously. I wonder if the First Minister can assure us that the Scottish Government will take this issue up with the UK Government to seek assurances that those immediately impacted will get their pensions, will be able to understand what pension they're entitled to, and will be compensated for the financial detriment that they've experienced.
First Minister.
I am familiar with the issues that Mr Brown raises, and the Scottish Government has been in contact with the UK Government about these issues. There are many examples where this is causing disruption and hardship to individuals, and I assure Mr Brown in Parliament that the Finance Secretary is in active dialogue with the UK Government to have the responsibility to resolve these issues.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've been contacted by residents in a development affected by cladding here in the capital. For more than 5 years now, residents have been waiting whilst the developer and Scottish Government continue discussions with no real progress. Almost £100,000 of public money has already been spent on 2 single building assessments. This development alone, the residents have now been told that these are effectively worthless. Residents are now facing a block building insurance cost of around £450,000 a year, more than double of what that should be. So can I ask the First Minister if he will agree to come with me to meet with these residents and understand the need for progress to protect residents in these buildings against these costs, and to put in place a plan for how Scotland can finally work to get these assessments done and a long-term solution for people who are living in these developments?
First Minister.
Well, President, the Government has steps in place to address the cladding issues. I acknowledge their seriousness, but the measures have been put in place by the Government. It obviously is a very detailed work, site by site, to resolve the particular issues that are involved, and the Housing Secretary is dealing with all of these questions. But I assure Mr Briggs that the Government has propositions in place that can address these issues, and will be happy to engage on individual questions.
Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the recent research from the University of Strathclyde Centre for Energy Policy indicating that jobs at the Sullomvo oil terminal depend on BP's decision about the Clare expansion. It's estimated around 250 jobs could be impacted across the Shetland economy, which would be devastating for our island community. So can the First Minister indicate what action his government will take following this new research?
First Minister.
As Beatrice Wishart will know, the Government has been actively pressing the United Kingdom Government, indeed I've done it myself to the Prime Minister directly, about the importance of removing the energy profits levy because of the damage that is being done to the sector and the impact that is having on the Scottish economy, because there has not been sufficient upsurge in renewable activity to counterbalance the issues in relation to oil and gas. So I assure Beatrice Wishart that these issues are regularly pressed with the United Kingdom Government. I want to make sure they understand the significance of the impact of their decisions on Scotland. I don't think they do at the present moment, to be blunt. I don't think they do in any way, shape or form, but the hardship and impact on the Scottish economy and on households will be significant if the energy profits levy is not removed, and we will be pressing for that to be the case.
Stuart McMillan.
Thanks, resident doctors in England are well, there's a damning indictment on them, on the Labour UK Government because of the resident doctors and the strike. 95,000 walked out in December alone. So, with the announcement this week with the situation in Scotland, will the First Minister join me in welcoming this pay deal for our doctors in Colin Sarwar and whoever his colleagues still support him to welcome this strong record of delivery for our dedicated NHS staff in Scotland?
Devolved responsibilities, First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I'm delighted that in exercising our devolved responsibilities, we've avoided a resident doctors' strike in Scotland, unlike in the rest of the United Kingdom, where the we now know that the United Kingdom Government is useless, and we know it from Mr Sarwar has told us how useless the UK Prime Minister is and the UK Government, and I'm so delighted that the negotiations of the Scottish Government, the Health Secretary and the commitment of the resident doctors has got us to the position where we've avoided industrial action, we've been able to open GP walk-in clinics, we've got falling waiting times, all because of the leadership of an SNP government on health.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Point of order, Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In the First Minister's response to questioning from Russell Finlay, he made remarks in relation to a net zero committee on the 27th of January, where apparently the committee was presented with a code of conduct by the Minister Jim Fairley in relation to the bus passes. However, the committee in question was on the 20th of January, and at that meeting the Minister had taken a unilateral decision to not share his code of conduct with the committee, nor did the Minister press the motion on the SSI. It was clear that the committee were not minded to support it. It is the Minister's incompetence that has been at the very heart of the delay in introducing legislation to remove bus passes from those committing antisocial behaviour.
On the point of order, Ms Webber.
Will the First Minister now take this opportunity to correct the record?
Thank you, Ms Webber. That is not a point of order, as the contribution of members... Well, members' contributions are not a matter for the Chair. Point of order, First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I just want to make it clear there is absolutely no reason whatsoever for me to change the official report of what I've said to Parliament today.
Thank you. These are not points of order. We will conclude First Minister's questions. There will be a brief suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the gallery to do so before we move on to the next item of business, members' business.